others shuffle in as they join, but wanted to first off say thank you and good morning to everybody who's with us today for the Rice in 2023 Resistance Best Management Practices and Stewardship webinar. My name is Matt Cook. I am a field marketing manager with BASF covering the South region. And with us today, we have, with the BASF folks include Dr. Kaelin Saul, tech service rep in Mississippi and Louisiana and parts of Texas as well. We have Dr. Keith Burnell. He's our stewardship manager here at BASF. We also have Dr. Tim Walker. He's the general manager at Horizon Ag. And then from Louisiana State University, we have Dr. Adam Famoso, associate professor in rice breeding and genetics, and Dr. Connor Webster, the Ag Center rice weed specialist. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Keith Burnell to get us kicked off, and then he'll turn it over from there. Actually, just really quickly before I kick over to you, Keith, if anyone has any questions during the webinar, you should see a place where you can click the questions down arrow, and you should be able to type in your questions there, or there's a chat function as well. At any time, please be sure to put in your questions or comments there, and we'll address those as we go. So with that, I will turn it over to Keith.
Well, thank y'all. One of the things we want to start off with is I wanted to let Adam have some time to really talk about the current status of Provisia outcrossing. So with that, this is really important, and one of the reasons why obviously we're doing this webinar. So I want to turn it over to Mr. Adam to take a little time to go over our Provisia outcrossing, where we're at right now, and also some of the testing procedures.
Sure. So yeah, I'm just going to give a really high-level overview of what we've seen so far, and focus more on kind of how we're able to detect this and how we go about detecting it, what we from these tests, what we can tell, and what we, sometimes what we can't always tell. But in 2022 was the first year we received samples from producers' fields. So either a grower or consultant would bring in a sample and say, I have this weedy rice that didn't die from the herbicide application, and we probably got a couple in 2020 and 21, and they always turned out to be escapes. So basically what we're testing for is we're taking a piece of leaf and we're testing the DNA, looking directly at whether or not that piece of leaf contains the Provisia trait. So if it has the trait, we expect it to be resistant to the herbicide. If it doesn't have the trait, we expect it to be susceptible to the herbicide. So in 20 and 21, the handful of samples we got all were negative for the Provisia trait. So in those cases, it's pretty much a situation of escape. Maybe the herbicide didn't hit that plant. But in 22, we received some samples early on, and they had the Provisia trait. So it wasn't a case of a application issue. It was a case of that weedy rice contained the Provisia trait, and a lot of these samples, are coming from outside the drill row. It's things that shouldn't be there. And when we test for the Provisia trait, we also will look for some other traits, and most notably the Clearfield trait. And in all the cases of samples we've received, if it had the Provisia trait, it also had the Clearfield trait. And I think that wasn't very surprising to us, mainly when you think about what fields are people, especially a couple years ago, what fields were people putting Provisia in, and they were putting Provisia in fields that Clearfield wasn't working anymore, where the Clearfield trait had outcrossed into the weedy populations, and we were no longer able to control it with Clearfield. So when we're growing Provisia in those fields, the weedy population already contains Clearfield resistance. So once we get these outcrosses of Provisia, what we see is now these weeds are resistant to both to both traits. The way it worked last year, folks would have this problem. They bring a sample by, we would test it. And in some cases, it was, nope, this should have died. It was an application issue. But a lot of those cases, and we estimated probably somewhere in the ballpark of 15 fields where we saw the clear confirmation that the Provisia had outcrossed into the weedy population. We can test one plant and tell that, but ideally we like to look at a broader sampling of the population, so leaves from different plants. And what that allows us to do is make a better assessment of what's going on, and also when it occurred. So when I say when it occurred, we can tell, and in not all cases, but if we have enough plants, 50 or 100 plants, we can get a pretty good idea that, did this just happen one generation ago? And without getting into too many of the technical details, if it happened one generation ago, if the first generation that outcross occurs, it's only going to have one copy of the Provisia trait. So in some of the fields, we might have 50 samples, and all 50 have one copy of the Provisia trait. And with that, we can say pretty confidently, okay, these plants that we're testing are one generation removed from that outcross. And so it at least gives you some idea of hey, this is a relatively recent thing. Maybe it's isolated to just that part of the field, and how you want to go about controlling that gives you a little bit more information to decide, do I want to try to burn that area down and try to prevent it from spreading? The other case when we see is if the weedy population has a mix of one copy of Provisia or two copies of Provisia. If it has two copies, it had to have happened at least two generations ago. So with this information, we can see in some of these fields, if it was in 2022, they say, well, I had Provisia in it in 2020, and if it was two generations, then we know what happened, and then it selfed, and it grew that seed and it selfed. Or it happened, 2 years before. We've had some cases where, it happened in 1 year, it outcrossed, and then during the second crop or during the crawfish crop, it managed to germinate and self again. So again, these are just a little bit more information we can gather. We also can tell, we typically look just to see what kind of weedy characteristics. So most of these are red rice or are weedy characteristics with pubescent leaves and things like that, but not in all cases. So it's a useful tool to kind of assess what's there. It's certainly not a tool that's going to fix what's there, but at least gives us an idea of when these things are happening and how widespread it might be in that field. The general process, like I said, we prefer to have between 50 and 100 samples, and those samples, if you want to try to get a broader understanding of what's going on, they really need to come from different plants. So getting a bunch of leaves from the same plant just is not really going to tell us anything additional. And like I said, we're not spraying any herbicide on it or doing anything like that. We're just testing the DNA to see, should it have survived the Provisia application or not. So what we recommend is trying to get somewhere 50 to 100 different plants, ideally, spaced out around the area of interest. And then we can test that. The size of the leaf is usually just, a few inches. We take a 4 millimeter punch, which is next to nothing, but normally like a 3 to 5 inch leaf is plenty. And fresh leaf is good, but also, if it's dead or it's a nest, we can often still get some information from that. So, this process, it really just depends on the capacity of what we have going on in the lab, but it's about when we have the time to do it, it usually takes about a day to run the samples, extract the DNA, run the samples, and then another, few hours, another day to do the analysis and the interpretations. But that's the general process. I'll probably just leave it at that, but I think we'll have some time later if there's more questions around the process or the information we obtained from it.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's a great lead in to some of the management strategies that we'll be talking about when it comes to some of the things, Kaelin. So, Kaelin, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Keith. So my name is Kaelin Saul, and today I'm going to talk to you about Clearfield rice stewardship. Next slide. So wanted to start off by talking about some best management practices, specifically when we're in season with Clearfield. So what we know is that weedy rice can be hard to control due to the large seed bank and the ability for it to emerge over a long period of time. So what can we do about it? The first thing is to have a start clean, stay clean mentality, which starts with our burn down. Since we're going to be planning to use our ALS and ME herbicides in season, we want to try to avoid using them in our burn down applications. So a few suggestions are to use tank mixes with Sharpen, Command, and glyphosate. Whenever we're thinking about our pre-emergence applications, we want to use products that are broad spectrum to control both broadleaf and grass weeds. You can throw glyphosate in the tank and also make sure to add a residual in there. One option is to use Prowl H2O for grass control as a delayed pre. Another thing is that spray volume is very important, especially for good coverage. So we recommend using 10 gallons per acre for ground applications and 5 gallons per acre for aerial applications. Slide. Okay, so now we talked about in season. What about after we harvest our seed? What do we need to do? So one of the main takeaways is crop rotation. Don't plant Clearfield rice in consecutive years in the same field. That's huge. That's one of the main takeaways from this presentation. You can rotate to Roundup Ready soybeans or corn, and make sure to use different modes of action herbicides for your weedy rice control whenever you are moving to those other crops. So in addition to using different modes of action, we want to specifically talk about our group 15 mode of action herbicides that provide that residual control. So including herbicides like Zidua, Outlook, Verdict, or even Dual Magnum in there. Another big takeaway is to make sure you're not solely relying on your ALS herbicides for residual control for weedy rice and grasses whenever you're rotating to these other crops. And if you have weedy rice in a Roundup Ready crop, go ahead and use Roundup, and also make sure to use a non-ALS herbicide for weedy rice and grass control in soybeans. Okay, so specifically for Louisiana and talking about crop rotation, following Clearfield rice, do not grow crawfish. Make sure to plant a non-Clearfield variety. Don't allow the field, if it goes into fallow, to have those escapes. So making sure that you're using repeated tillage and also glyphosate in order to control that weedy rice. Another really big takeaway from this presentation is make sure you do not allow Clearfield rice to go to seed in a non-rice year. Whenever you go to seed, then you can create a bigger problem and have issues down the road. And this will also include fallow and crawfish production fields. And then also use cultivation whenever possible. And then finally, I just wanted to show you all what the portfolio looks like for Clearfield rice. This slide specifically, I want to point your attention to Beyond Extra. So Beyond Extra is the same formulation as Beyond, but we did make some slight modifications to the label. So the use rate for a single application is still the same between Beyond and Beyond Extra for 4 to 6 fluid ounces per acre. However, with Beyond Extra, you can have as opposed to with Beyond where you can only have 2 applications. And because of that, the maximum use in season for Beyond Extra is 15 fluid ounces per acre per year. But please make sure to read the Beyond Extra label prior to using the product to make sure you're using it correctly. And now I appreciate you guys and your time. So I'm going to turn it over to Keith to talk about Provisia stewardship.
All right, thank you, Kaelin. Yeah, like Kaelin said, I'm going to talk about Provisia, and you'll see some of the same similarities here. As we know with Provisia, as Adam was talking about, we're talking about the Weedy seed bank. We know it's enormous, so we want to do everything we can to keep that seed bank, basically keep it in the bank, not letting it get out. And if we do, again, we want to start clean. We talked about some of these herbicides from a clearfield standpoint. One of the biggest things here is avoid using an ACCH herbicide. So your graminicides, basically, we want to cut the use of that down in a burn down situation. And the fact is, we do have other options besides using an ACCH in a burn down situation. Again, we talked about a couple of options here with glyphosate, Sharpen, and Command. Those are some, and Connor will talk about more in just a little bit, so I won't belabor that point. But again, biggest thing here is when you're in a Provisia system, avoid using those ACCHs in season as a burn down, as well as looking at your pre-emergent and broadleaf grass control. You want to broaden that spectrum. In this case, I would let glyphosate be your friend any chance you get a chance in this situation with the burn down. Again, we talked about proper coverage. As we know, that could be a big challenge, regardless of whether it's rice or soybeans. Coverage is key, especially with any weed control. You want to get it on that leaf. You want to get it down there, and you want to also make sure that you're using the proper adjuvants to make sure that you're maximizing that herbicide efficacy of whatever herbicide, whether it's Provisia or whatever you're putting in there. So again, proper GPA, we talked about that before. We need the water in there to get it down to those weeds. The other thing is, we know when we're trying to control weeds in general, when they're stressed and they're under any kind of stress, whether that's drought tolerant or whatever, they're a little harder. The other thing is try to control them when they're smaller. So make sure you get those applications on as small of a weed as you can. And again, one of the things we have made the revisions to the Provisia label is we do have 3 applications. So that does allow for a little more flexibility, especially if it takes you a little bit longer to get that flood on the rice, or you basically just have an extra application. Or in the case of Louisiana, you do have the potential to utilize that in your ratoon crop. I'll let Connor talk a little bit more about the broadening of spectrum, but also we've got to be careful what we're putting in those tank mixes, because some tank mixes will antagonize. Again, one of the things we want to do to prevent resistance is making sure we're maximizing all the herbicides that go in those tanks. So be cognizant of what you're putting in the tank. We want to broaden that spectrum, but we also don't want to antagonize. And there are different ways we can go around controlling all those weeds. And we'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. Obviously, when you talk about resistance, we talk about different modes of action as best we can. And also, again, utilizing tank mixes in the first one, in the first application. When we look at the 2 and 3 pass system, a lot of people are very, very happy with the 2-pass system. But again, we did make that change to allow for a 3rd pass in here. And you can see one of the recommendations we do have here is 11, 10, and 10. Again, making sure you're using the correct adjuvant. And again, I'm going to let Connor talk a little bit more about these systems and how they fit in Louisiana. So like Adam, I think, did a great job of helping us all understand, we need to control any weedy rice, any outliers. We can't let this stuff go to seed. I know we have these pond edges and things of that nature where maybe we're not as paying as much attention to as we are in the actual rice crop, but those are also things that can also outcross. We want to make sure that we make sure we keep our areas clean, just like when we did with pigweeds and roadside ditches. We want to make sure we're keeping it clean and not letting these things go to seed, whatever means we need to, whether that's chemical or tillage. And we talk about Provisia rice. Let's don't use that in a non rice year, especially when we got fallow crawfish fields. Again, just like Kaelin mentioned, this is a schematic of some options that you have in the Provisia rice system. Again, Connor's going to talk a little bit more about weed control here in just a minute. Just wanted to kind of give you a schematic about how you can utilize this in the Provisia system. There are different options for weed control. So kind of coming to a close, again, we want to make sure we have proper GPA, right adjuvants in there, actively growing in small weeds, different modes of action as best we can, whether that's prowl, command, bastogram, what have you, depending on what weeds you're going after, and making sure you're doing the right tank mixture, but making sure they're not antagonizing your tank mixture when you are putting those together to broaden your spectrum of weed control. The other thing is, non-chemical, we always think of chemicals to control these weeds, but also think about some of the other things we have. We can use water management. We can also just go out there and rogue it, whether that's with tillage or various other things, making sure that we keep those rogues from red rice escapes. We can't allow those to continue to occur, and whatever we can to do that, whether that's rolling them, letting them get up so the frost can actually kill them, or basically using some tillage. So with that being said, I believe the next one is going to be Mr. Connor. Webster is going to go over some of the rice weed management. But I did want to wrap up with this one before that. Again, hitting home this message of we need to have proper GPA. If you do get into some of those harvest and weedy fields, make sure you're harvesting those last. If you're able to identify those before you go into harvest, I think it'll make it a lot easier. And obviously, at the end of the season, cleaning your equipment so we're not spreading that seed. We talked about crop rotation and then controlling that weedy rice in the other croppings and the other crops that you have in the rotations.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Keith. Really quickly, there was a question that got brought up in the chat. I don't know who the best person to answer it is, but I figured we'll bring it up now and see where we get. But so the question is, can PVL03 withstand a flood over the rice after spraying Provisia on 1 to 2 leaf rice? So we can either address that now, or we can take that. We can see if that question gets answered as we go along. Whatever you guys want to do. What do you think?
What y'all's feelings?
I think I can take it. I mean, it just might get a little stretched out from the flood. Any extra stress on the rice like that will enhance the Provisia injury, but it should grow out of it.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Connor.
Thanks, Keith. So my name is Connor Webster. I'm a rice weed scientist with LSU. So I'm going to be talking mainly about weed control in the Provisia system, and mainly antagonism that we're seeing in that system. So I'll start off with a little bit of early season control and things we can do to better steward this production system. So we still need to be using residuals in Provisia rice in kind of the early years. And I think we've done a little bit better this year. Is we started using more residuals up front, like command and prowl and facet, using these residuals to control our annual grasses. So when it comes time for Provisia, we don't have a lot of interference with other weeds when we're trying to target weedy rice. So we can maximize our coverage on the weedy rice by eliminating some of these annual grasses as well as broadleaf weeds, using stuff like sharpen or prowl, facet, gambit as a pre-emerge or early season residual application. That can also help reduce the need for having to mix Provisia with a broadleaf herbicide in post applications. So we really need to make sure we're still using these residuals up front and not just relying on Provisia as a kind of a silver bullet for grass control. It's a very good grass product, but we need to maintain the stewardship and use Provisia for long we have it. So I like to show this picture. Showed it a couple times at several producer meetings and Provisia meetings. This is a good example. This is a field of PVL03 in St. Landry Parish in Louisiana. This is just a good example of a good residual package of Command and Sharpen up front. We're getting good annual grass control, as well as some broadleaf control, some rice flat sedge control from the Sharpen. And it allowed us to use the Provisia to target only weedy rice and to maximize our coverage. It's a pretty bad infestation here, but we were able to get good coverage and getting pretty good control of the weedy rice in this field. So now I'll move into talking about antagonism. Antagonism has historically been an issue with Group 1 herbicides, whether that's clethodim, Provisia, or the old formulations for Sure 2, and soybeans and other broadleaf crops, Rice Star, or Clincher. All those Group 1 herbicides have a history of antagonism. So more times than not, it's going to be there, even if you use something that you think is going to be better in terms of antagonism. The chances of it still being there is pretty substantial. Depending on which herbicide you mix, you might not see it because you might need a non-treated next to it to really tell the difference. So with that, we like to at least have one application in the Provisia system with Provisia applied by itself to maximize or to minimize any kind of escapes or misses that we might have due to antagonism. There's some debate on which application, the first or second application, we should mix. A lot of people mix in the first application, which is fine, but I think the decision should be solely based off of the size of the grass and the weedy rice. So the bigger the grass or weedy rice, the more chance, more room for antagonism you have. So a smaller grass or weedy rice, that's when you should consider mixing. So typically less than 3 to 4 leaves. A lot of times that does come in the first application, but if you have a good residual package down, that might happen in the second application. So we really need to know what to mix and what not to mix. So these 4 herbicides, SAM, Q4D, Regiment, and Grass, are 4 that I always preach absolute do not mixes with Provisia. I've got a couple questions about Novixid, which is a new Corteva product, which is Roy and Grass prepackaged mixture. You still have that grass in that prepackaged mixture, so we need to avoid using products that might contain these 4 in a prepackaged mixture. So first I'll start, I've got it kind of broken out into some different herbicide mode of action. So I'll start with ALSs, and then I'll go into some contacts and systemic herbicides. So this is weedy rice with ALS herbicide. So that left bar, the bright green bar, is Provisia applied by itself, and all the other bars are Provisia mixed with these ALS herbicides that you see across the bottom: Londax, Regiment, Permit, Strata, Strata Pro, Strata XP2, Grasp, and Grasp Extra. So these are all ALS inhibiting herbicides. So the entire purple bar is what we would expect the control to be based off of the Provisia applied alone. And the dark portion on the bottom of the bar is what we observed when we mixed Provisia with these herbicides. And then the light purple is the amount of antagonism that we saw with these herbicides. So even with some of the herbicides that we commonly use, like Permit, we use a lot of Permit for sedge control in the Provisia system. You're still getting some level of antagonism. And even with antagonism, some days you can see it, some days you don't. You might do the same thing one day and you don't see any antagonism, do the same exact thing the next day, and you're getting a different level of antagonism. There's no really good way to explain it, but it's just one of those things that we can't fix. So some of the herbicides that tend to be a little bit better in terms of antagonism are sulfonylurea herbicides, so Londax, Permit, and Strata herbicides. Things like Regiment and Grasp, like I mentioned earlier, you're seeing a lot of antagonism there with those 2 products. And even with Grasp Extra, it's still got Grasp in it, it's Grasp and Grandstand. You're seeing that almost same level of antagonism. But you've got 2 herbicides in that prepackaged mixture, so you're seeing a little bit more antagonism when you're putting more herbicide in the tank. So there's actually we've seen that with Strata and Strata XP2, which I'm pretty sure is from Florac. I have to double check on that one. So you're seeing multiple herbicides in a prepackaged mixture kind of playing into that antagonism. So last slide was Weedy rice. This slide is barnyard grass 28 days after treatment. So we're seeing the same trends, a little bit more extreme for barnyard grass control in terms of antagonism with regimented grass. So this is a picture of our plot setup from some of these trials that I'm going through. So the 4 center rows were planted in Provisia. I believe this is PVL01. This was done several years back. And the outside rows are hybrid 745 and CL111. That kind of represents our weedy rice outcross populations. There's also a natural stand of red rice in these plots as well as barnyard grass. So if you look at Provisia applied alone at 28 days, we're controlling those outside rows with almost 100% control. And we're still getting good control of barnyard grass there within the plot as well. And so the picture here on the left is Provisia mixed with grass. This is mainly barnyard grass that's in this plot. So you're seeing that level of antagonism that we saw on these data slides. The picture on the right is Provisia and permit. We use a lot of permit with Provisia for sedge control. You can still see a few escapes on these outside rows. So it's not perfect in terms of antagonism, but it's going to be a lot better than something like grass or regimen. So kind of sum that up. So each one of the ALS inhibiting herbicides did antagonize Provisia to some level, but grass and regiment was a whole different level. It was a lot more antagonistic. And majority of the time, second application of Provisia was able to overcome this previous antagonism from the first application. So we don't really see that being an issue coming back and trying to kill weeds that have been antagonized. And like I said earlier, some of our sulfonylurea herbicides tend to be a better mixture option. So now I'll move into some contact herbicides mixed with Provisia. So we have the same style graph. We have Basagran, Aim, Stam, and Sharpen, and we put Valero in here because it's a common mixed partner in Stam, sold under the trade name of Ricebeaux. So the big takeaway here is the Stam. This is actually pretty generous in terms of barnyard grass antagonism with Stam mixed with Provisia. A lot of times we can see complete tie-up and have 0% control of barnyard grass with Stam mixed with Provisia. So Stam, the propanil containing product, really need to be avoided in terms of mixing. And some things like Basagran and Aim and Sharpen, they're okay. Basagran's one that we use quite a bit, and more of the bunky area of Louisiana where we pick up a little bit more rice flat sedge, ALS resistance. We use a fair amount of Basagran in the Provisia system there for the control of ALS resistant flat sedge. Basagran might slow the Provisia activity down at first, but if you give it a little time, it'll end up overcoming that antagonism. So here's some more pictures, same plot setup as before, Provisia there on the left by itself, and then Provisia mixed with Stam. So you can really see that level of antagonism. This might be a higher level of barnyard grass infestation that you might have on your farm, but this is kind of a worst case scenario situation. So kind of sum that up, we really need to stay away from propanil containing products. Like I said, Basagran and Sharpen. It can antagonize Provisia early on, but if you give it a little bit of time, the Provisia should continue to work and kill those plants. Might not be 100%, but it's better than some of our other options. Now I'll move into some auxin herbicides. So we have 2,4-D, Facet, Grandstand, and Voyant. Facet and Grandstand, I've seen these be a little bit more antagonistic than this. They can go back and forth in terms of antagonism mixed with Provisia. 2,4-D is consistently antagonistic with Provisia, so you really need to avoid 2,4-D in the Provisia system. Voyant tends to be one of our better options as a mixed partner for post control, especially if you're trying to get that second application out before flood. If you've not mixed in the first application, application, Lawrence, a pretty good option for mixtures with Provisia and Antagonism. So here's the first slide with Barnyardgrass. This is Weedy rice, kind of showing the same results with 2,4-D being pretty antagonistic with Provisia. So we did another study where we broke out components. We used Ricebeaux and Provisia, looking at putting Ricebeaux or Provisia before a Ricebeaux application, after a Ricebeaux application, and mixture. So if you kind of start in the middle of the table, we have Provisia applied alone, and then Provisia applied in mixture, and you can really see that level of antagonism with Provisia mixed with Ricebeaux or any kind of propanil-containing product. On the left side of the graph, we have Provisia applied before an application of Ricebeaux. So we're not seeing an antagonistic interaction there, but when we wait and put Provisia after a Ricebeaux or propanil-containing product, we can see antagonism up to 7 days after treatment. So if you put a propanil-containing product out first, you really need to wait at least 7 days before you come back with Provisia. But you can avoid this by putting the Provisia before a propanil-containing product. And this is for Barnyardgrass Control. And you can see the level of antagonism decreasing the further away you get from that Ricebeaux application. This is kind of the same table for Weedy rice control. Once again, putting Provisia after application of Ricebeaux, we're seeing that antagonism there versus putting Provisia in front of propanil-containing product. So, kind of sum that up, the Provisia was antagonized when it was mixed with the Ricebeaux, as well as putting it 1 to 3 days after a Ricebeaux application. We didn't see any antagonism when Provisia was applied alone, or 1 to 7 days before Ricebeaux, or waiting 7 days after Ricebeaux. So I'll kind of wrap things up with a couple best management practices going forward. We need to let the size and population of the weedy rice dictate our follow-up application. So I know we have that 10-day window on the label. We don't need to just wait 10 days and come right back in the field. We need to be walking these fields and make sure we have a germinating population of weedy rice, since Provisia is a post-emergence application with very little soil residual activity. We need to make sure we have a good flush of weedy rice and we're not wasting that product and just getting a flush right behind our second application or our third application. Like I said earlier, still using residuals for grass and broadleaf activity. Trying to maximize our coverage using higher carrier volumes, 10 to 15 out of a ground rig, or at least 5 out of an airplane. Only mix when the weedy rice and grasses are small, typically less than 3 to 4 leaves. And like Keith said earlier, we need to make sure we're cleaning our equipment, our combines, kind of map out your harvest schedule. If your planting dates will allow you, try to harvest those weedy rice fields. And so I'll turn it over to I believe Tim is next.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Connor. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I think Tim is next. I'll just, there were a couple questions that came in. I believe they got answered. So I think we're okay on that end, but I'll just remind everybody on the call, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat.
Well, thank you, Matt and Keith. I appreciate you all organizing the webinar. It's certainly been a pleasure to participate with this group. Again, my name's Tim Walker. I'm the general manager for Horizon Ag. So we work to bring the varieties to work with the Clearfield production system, as well as the Provisia rice system. With respect to the Clearfield system, we have some excellent varieties that are out there. You know, for the coastal region, probably our predominant Clearfield varieties will be the CLL-17, and actually this year the CLJ-01, largely due to the aromatic contract, which is a very good thing for the United States rice industry, because that helps us to grow rice here in the United States as opposed to importing lots of rice from outside the country. So that is a very good thing for the industry, and certainly Horizon is pleased to be part of that. Another variety that really saw some increases on the Clearfield side this year, again, market driven, was the CLM-04. That's been a variety, a medium grain variety that's performed very well for us in the past in South Louisiana and the coastal area of Texas. And once again, our sales have increased substantially due to the medium grain demand. We are excited about the CLL-19, a new LSU Ag Center developed Clearfield release that will be commercially available in 2024. I had the opportunity earlier in the week to see some seed production down in Texas. The variety looks just really, really good, very uniform in its stand. We have, just based on the data that's been collected over the last few years with that particular variety, it's going to complement our last two releases, the CLL-16 and the CLL-18, very well. CLL-16 and CLL-18 have been our highest performing from an overall yield standpoint, as well as a yield stability standpoint, regardless of whether you planted in the coastal bend area of Texas or the far, northeast, Boot Hill of Missouri. Those varieties have just performed very, very well. If you had to knock those varieties, they are a bit later in maturity, which doesn't work quite as well in South Louisiana for those who want 2-second crop. And that's the reason that we're so excited about CLL-19, because that variety has consistently performed with those two very high yielding varieties, but it comes in a maturity package very similar to CL-111. It also has the PITA and PIKS blast resistance genes. And so we do have that genetic resistance built into the CLL-19, similar to CLL-16 and 17. So that's on the Clearfield side. Those varieties continue to perform very, very well. We have outlined, and most of this seminar has been based on challenges that we see in the Weedy rice and even to a certain extent in some grass control. But those varieties, continue to raise the bar in terms of overall performance. Now, switching over to the Provisia rice system, PVL03 will probably be the most popular variety or hybrid grown in South Louisiana this year. We've probably, we're looking to double the acres compared to 2022. And that is largely due to the excellent performance that we've had in weed control, a variety that stands very well, yields very well, and has an excellent package quality rice also. So we're excited about the PVL03 and its performance that it has given us thus far. And one other variety that we will be bringing to market next year, it's actually in seed production in Puerto Rico right now. We hope to harvest that over the next few weeks, is a variety that was developed by the University of Arkansas. It will be the first University of Arkansas Provisia variety. And again, it will be available to a certain extent in 2024 and then to a larger extent in 2025. But we're very excited to be partnered certainly with BASF and the seed side of these two excellent technologies, but also the university breeding programs, especially LSU and the University of Arkansas. We work very closely with Doctors Famoso and Shaw and their development process, and are very involved in the early screening of these varieties to make sure that when a variety comes to market under the Horizon brand, that we've done all that we can possibly do to make sure that those varieties are going to perform up to the standards that are needed for our industry. I would just like, I guess, to talk and affirm a lot of the messages that we all have heard today in the webinar, especially as it relates to the Provisia technology. This is the technology that we have to kill the weedy rice complex that has plagued South Louisiana for the last several years now. And we need to treat it as such. It's an extremely important technology. To my knowledge, there's no other technologies that are going to be available, at least in the next few years. So this is the one we've got, and we need to do our due diligence in protecting the technology. Crop rotation, residual herbicides, all of those things come into play. Roguing, whether it be chemical or physical roguing, we do have a great technology, and not only is it a great technology, it is the only technology that we have right now to kill the biggest nemesis that we have in the rice industry, especially in South Louisiana. So I just encourage our listeners, and whether you're advising or whether you're actually planting and growing the crop, we need to treat this technology as the kind of precious jewel that it is, and do the very best that we possibly can to extend this technology as well as the Clearfield technology into the future. Again, we appreciate the customers out there that continue to buy Horizon branded seed. We appreciate your business, and we appreciate your partnership, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all in the future.
Yeah, Tim, I appreciate that. That's a great way to wrap this call up, Tim. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody that was on the panel today. Just a couple things before we wrap up here. This is the QR code to receive credits for your CCA. If this QR code is not working for you, we had an issue a couple weeks ago, but if this is not working for you, what we're going to do is everyone that was on this call today will receive a follow-up email with a survey on it where we'll ask for your CCA number, and you will be you'll get those credits. So just want to make sure that just in case this QR code isn't working, just make sure you are filling out that quick survey that we're going to send out right after this. So there are actually no questions in the chat. So I think we're okay, but just to wrap up really quickly, as a part of that survey, if you give us your address, we will mail you a thank you gift for your participation today. And the last thing I have is, if you do have any questions, please be sure to follow up with your local BASF rep, whether that be a business representative or a tech service representative, whoever that might be. Please don't hesitate to reach out to them. And that is all we have for today. Appreciate your attendance, and have a good rest of your week. Thank you.